it feels a bit like fat shaming. And from a Labour health secretary, that feels like quite an odd place to be. And I do wonder if this had been a Conservative health secretary who'd said we are going to, jab people to get them back into work. I think there'd be absolute uproar from many on the Labour side.
So, Sam, 2 weeks out from budget week, and it's, all anyone's talking about in Westminster. I don't know about anywhere else, but every day we're kind of chasing new bits of speculation. There's drips and drabs in the papers. The atmosphere gets quite it gets a bit feverish at times in the run-up, doesn't it?
Yeah, particularly in the press gallery where all those hacks are sat, everybody's running up and down, worried has your rival got the edge on you. So, everyone's talking about capital gains tax, national insurance.
Who's got the door closed because they've got a scoop on fuel duty.
But we'll get into all that later on. But for now, let's begin.
I'm Lizzy Buchan, political editor of the Daily Mirror.
And I'm Sam Lister, political editor at the Daily Express. Well, aside from the budget, the other hot topic in Parliament is who is taking Ozempic, and it turns out it is half of Parliament. It would seem
Definitely
more people than you think.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting topic because actually the Health Secretary Wes Streeting has suggested that he wants to make weight loss jabs available more freely on the NHS to help get people back into work. Now, this is a hugely controversial issue because obviously, in many ways, you're stigmatising people who are overweight and are not working. And so we've polled our readers to see what they think about this. And so we asked, should people receiving unemployment benefits be given weight loss drugs to get back into work? And the readers of the Express say it was 77% no, my readers, and to 23% yes. And for the Mirror, it was 66% no and 34% yes. So overall, between readers of both papers, and there's very rarely agreement between our readers, Lizzy, isn't there?
Highly unusual, yeah.
But overall, they are broadly in agreement. You've got 68% think it's a bad idea compared to 32% who are in favour. And I think that is quite staggering, really. It shows that actually people don't think this is the way to go for many, many reasons. I think some feel it is there is a problem with stigmatising people. Some feel that actually this is not the solution because if you do have weight issues, that long term this will not help you. Others feel it's a bit of I think one of the comments says you're using people as guinea pigs. This is not right. So there's lots of different concerns about this. And it's quite interesting that it's come from a Labour health secretary.
Yeah, I think it's quite a radical idea in a lot of ways. And I do think that there is an argument to be made for it. I don't know whether they fully made it yet, because I think if you look at it and it sort of says, okay, people are being given weight loss drugs to get them back into work, that kind of makes it seem, the argument that Wes Streeting made, that it makes it seem that it's so simple that some people are just very overweight and that's why they're at home, which obviously isn't really the case.
Yeah.
Obesity is a sort of contributing factor to a number of illnesses, and this is kind of, I suppose, what the government thinks is a clever way to look at two quite big problems, which is the NHS, funding the NHS, and Britain's productivity problem, and kind of getting people back into the workforce, which is an issue that we've talked about on this podcast before, that the Tories were really grappling with. Illnesses linked to obesity cost the NHS billions and billions of pounds. So they clearly think that they could save money by doing this if they can get people to lose weight, reduce the burden on the NHS for dealing with those kinds of obesity-linked illnesses. But there is this sort of risk of, are you medicalising obesity here that maybe makes some people quite nervous? And, in the comments below our poll, somebody said losing weight doesn't magically cure illness, which is true. And also another person said losing weight will not cure our decreasing productivity because that's fueled by laziness, which is another perception that some people might have. So, yeah, I think that there are broader issues about how you get people back into work. And I guess this is being trialled, so we'll have to wait and see. But I can see that there is a nervousness here, both amongst the public and probably some politicians.
I think it's interesting that it feels a bit like fat shaming. And from a Labour health secretary, that feels like quite an odd place to be. And I do wonder if this had been a Conservative health secretary who'd said we are going to, jab people to get them back into work. I think there'd be absolute uproar from many on the Labour side. So I just think it's one of those issues that if it had been pushed by the Conservatives, would have been reacted to really badly by many, many Labour MPs, but we haven't heard those MPs. I mean, it's hard to say how they would, but it feels like instinctively would have been something that would have caused an awful lot of upset. And I think it's interesting when Wes Streeting, he seems to suggest that the NHS, obviously obesity is a huge problem for the NHS, as you mentioned, but he seems to mention that the NHS can't bear the burden of people's lifestyle choices. But it's interesting that, there are so many factors in life that are contribute to bad health. And actually a lot of them can be quite middle-class choices. For example, horse riding or rugby or lots of sport leads to men of a certain age ending up in hospital with all kinds of injuries. But, there's no suggestion that we will go down the route of banning sport because it's perceived to be a healthy thing overall. But you see, if you look back to people like Professor David Nutt, he talks about how ecstasy is safer than horse riding. And, you get into this whole kind of minefield about if you're talking about burdens on the NHS, where do those burdens stop? What enjoyment are you allowed in life? What's allowed under a kind of Labour government? What's perceived to be an okay thing to indulge in? So, I just think you go down a really weird rabbit hole if you are talking about lifestyle burdens on the NHS. It's quite judgmental, I think.
Yeah, I think it does create a situation where you open yourself up to sort of accusations of nanny state and all of that sort of thing. But it is tricky because I think Wes Streeting is he's sort of prepared to sometimes say the difficult things. He'll kind of break with what was accepted Labour ideas, and you've seen that in the sense that he's gone to war with the GPs, a few times. He's said some quite tough things. He's talked about relying on the private sector for healthcare, not for himself, but using private sector capacity, which is quite controversial among some Labour MPs. So I think he's prepared to sort of grip maybe the fact that I think that a lot of people working in the health space just say public health interventions do work, in the smoking ban has dramatically reduced the number of people who smoke cigarettes, but then other things have happened instead. And I think you do get really difficult things like alcohol is the kind of the elephant in the room, because that has so many linked health problems, but nobody wants to give up drinking because across the board it's part of kind of people's lives. And so I know from sort of talking to people who around the health secretary that public health is a space that they're really focused on, because they know that they can't pour more money into the NHS. It's just going to eat it. So it's just a black hole of cash. And so I think they're trying to think of other ways. But yeah, politically it becomes quite difficult if you start saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I think that's a space that Conservatives would certainly occupy it to oppose, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I suppose the libertarian side of the right would certainly oppose all these interventions, because, you have a right as a grown adult to choose how to live your life, and whether that is healthy or unhealthy is kind of up to you. And I think that there is a very judgmental streak at the moment with the Labour government in terms of, you banning outdoor smoking, trying to jab people back into work. It all does feel very.
But isn't there
nanny knows best?
Isn't there an argument though that we live in a society, our actions have an impact on other people, whether that's just you walking down the street or, you know, what you do, like where you park your car or anything like that impacts on the people around you, that maybe we all need to think of ourselves as citizens and using public services and how we do that.
Blimey.
I think that's the argument. I mean, I say that as somebody
put down that cream cake because, you know, little Johnny over there is going to have to
no
pay.
more cake. No, I do like for myself, you know, I'm not somebody who is like always really healthy and always does all the right things. But I do think
that's it. It's this
that
kind
is
of,
the argument,
you
isn't
have
it?
to do the right thing because you're a citizen and so therefore
But people care about the people around them,
if you eat the cream cake, you're a burden to somebody else, and it's, you know. But the middle class, you know, £20 bottle of wine is fine.
But I agree with you. Like, I think you shouldn't be making people feel bad. Like, nobody should be made to feel like they're a burden on other people. And the people that tend to be, you know, you're often looking at people who are vulnerable in these spaces, and so they shouldn't be made to feel more like they're outliers in any way. But yeah, I think it's something that the middle classes need to think about as well, because the middle classes are also, there's also issues with alcohol, there's also issues with obesity and all sorts of other things. I'm not sure whether I've won this argument or whether I've entirely got there, but I think that's where they're trying to go, is what I'm saying.
I totally see that, and that is a very, you can see, you know, of the left, that makes a lot of sense. I generally think, you know, I take the view that you get on with your life and you live it, and as long as you're not, you know, interfering in other people's lives,
causing harm to others.
Yeah, you know, don't smoke in the car with a child, but you know, do we want Labour governments telling us to put down the cream cake? I think that's a step too far.
But smoking in a car with a child might have been considered to be a bossy thing to have said previously. You know, in the past, people who have been like, well, I can make a decision about what's right for my family. So there are, our perceptions do shift, don't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
I think there's a problem with
no more croissants for either of us.
Adapting, I suppose. The top and bottom of it is, should we have to adapt how we live our lives so we are not a burden on the NHS? Because essentially, isn't the NHS... I'm not saying actually we should just be wild and, you know, have no responsibility. I believe in personal responsibility, and obviously you should try your best to, you know, look after yourself. But I think, you know, the NHS is there to serve us. We're not there to serve the NHS, and sometimes it feels as though it's gone, you know... We have skewed the kind of, you know, the NHS was set up to look after people, not to kind of be the reason why we have to live a certain lifestyle.
Yeah, you're right. I think because it's sort of teetering, there is now this shift in responsibility that now the public needs to save it rather than the other way around. I suppose the alternative is you pour loads more money into it, and you don't, you know, to fix all of these things. But where do you find the money? Question for Rachel Reeves, I think.
Taxes. Always, isn't it? Right. Anyway, let's get into the budget.
The budget is 2 weeks away, and every day there's a new story about a new bit of speculation. There's a new row. Obviously, you know, the Treasury this week has been paving, you know, rolling the pitch for how difficult things are going to be, and we've had a lot of gloomy rhetoric on that, but this week there was more kind of sort of suggestions that the £22 billion black hole that they need to fill, so they need to find billions more from possibly spending cuts and tax rises, but Rachel Reeves has got to kind of marry that with the fact that she's promised not to hike taxes on working people, which was repeatedly made, a commitment repeatedly made during the election and in the manifesto, and also that at Labour conference, both the PM and the Chancellor said that there won't be a return to austerity. So I wouldn't fancy looking at her sums, I think.
No, I think it's a very tricky position for the Chancellor. She boxed herself in during the general election, and that leaves you with quite obscure ways to do this. But actually, when push comes to shove, when you, you know, throw the figures into the computer, what comes out is actually if you target this group of people, then this happens, and you don't actually really raise that much money overall. So she has got a bit of a conundrum there. But also, I think this black hole, it started off at 22 billion, now it's supposedly 40 billion. Where are we going to get to? And I think certainly the Conservatives, I've done a piece today where they say that the black hole is bogus. They feel that there's been a lot of kind of jury pokery, shall we say, with what's gone on, and the aides to the Prime Minister insist that there's been a cover-up and that there were lies by the previous Chancellor and his team. And I don't think that really holds water, because essentially what they're saying is the previous Chancellor was in the Treasury covering up £22 billion worth of a huge black hole without anybody in the Treasury noticing. None of these really clever people who work in the Treasury happened to notice that Jeremy Hunt was sat in his office hiding away this massive black hole. And if they did know about this massive black hole and they didn't do anything about it, I think we've got serious problems with our public officials, and I'm sure that's not what Labour actually are trying to imply. So I think there's a bit of an issue there.
I think there was an issue in the sense that I agree that I'm sure that people were aware of some of these projects and these overspends, but maybe it hadn't been looked at in the round. And I know certainly from talking to like a number of cabinet ministers that they all said this decision was just sitting on the Secretary of State's desk. There were loads of things like that, maybe not big spending ones sometimes, but a decision that was just sitting, waiting, and nothing had been done about it. So the officials, there's nothing they can do about it if the Secretary of State is just sat there being like, I don't know what I'm going to do about teachers' pay, I'll just wait, kick that down the road. So I think when you put that all together, this is where you get this picture. But I agree there are some quite big numbers floating around. And actually, as we've said before on this podcast, it's always about choices, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember going on a trip earlier in the year where Rishi Sunak, when he was still PM, was talking about defence spending and wanting to increase defence spending each year. And he managed to do a proper wheeze to try and get those numbers. Like, it was really complicated.
Yeah.
We were all staring at the sums. I don't understand how you get this by, like, something weird has to change in 2028. It was slightly beyond me. So every chancellor, every sort of set of Treasury officials can do clever things with the numbers.
That is definitely true. I think there was, though, a freedom of information request was put into the Treasury to ask them to lay out the figures for the detailed figures for the 22 billion black hole. And they replied saying they couldn't because they didn't have accurate information. And this was only a few weeks ago. And it's like, actually, this £22 billion black hole was set out in July as a fact. And if you haven't got the accurate information by September, October, I think there's something slightly amiss there. Anyway, we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole on this.
Too many billions and billions.
But ultimately, I think you are right. The Chancellor's got quite a difficult kind of balancing act to carry out here. And also, we have had all this doom and gloom for quite some time, and she has to try and actually set out a bit of a positive vision. And after months and months of, telling us how bad it all is, and she will have to kind of blame the Conservatives for whatever measures she takes. She's also got to try and tell the rest of the world that actually Britain isn't in a terrible position, that actually things are on the up. And I'm not quite sure how she's going to manage to do all those things.
I think it's very difficult because they decided politically, obviously, to do this whole doom and gloom, blame the Tories thing, which is fair enough. I think you can argue about how much of it is the Tories' fault or not, but every government has done that before. David Cameron did it as well. But they've lent so hard into that strategy that it then came a point before Labour conference where there was a lot of people behind the scenes going, okay, maybe we've gone a bit far here. Maybe we need to give a bit more hope. But they're still treading this line of things are going to be hard. There's, PM and the Chancellor this week both saying, it's going to be tough, and trying to kind of pave the way for that to be difficult. But the downside is you've also got to say Britain's open for business, right? They put a lot of emphasis on this big investment summit that was hosted on Monday where loads of big businesses came. And that is the kind of thing that they're trying to drum up. Every foreign trip I've been on with the Prime Minister so far, they're always trying to announce investment. They're meeting business leaders abroad. They're trying to get investment in. So you need a bit of optimism as well to have that confidence in the city from foreign investors. And also you just got to tell voters that life's going to get better. Otherwise, what was the point?
Yes,
you know?
Yeah.
Like,
vote for change.
Yeah.
It's going to get worse.
Exactly. So I don't know whether maybe some of this is part of the kind of time-honoured tradition of, you know, making it all look really bad and then the budget's much better on the day and there's a rabbit out the hat and all of that. But yeah, it's not clear at the moment where that's going to come. And they have the sort of no austerity suggestion is tricky because it's very tight, the envelope. And I mean, you've seen today there's been reports that several quite senior cabinet ministers have been writing to the PM to complain about which is not a good place to be in 2 weeks out from the budget and 100 days into your government.
No, and you know, this is the reality of government, isn't it? It's
budgets
hard. Particularly are hard. Yeah, they are tough, and as you say, it's all about choices, isn't it? So let's see what choices Rachel Reeves makes. They've said no tax increases on working people, but ultimately the wider economy does have an effect on working people, whether they get pay rises, whether there's enough work to go round. So it is a very delicate balancing act. Lizzy, this Taylor Swift story has gone on longer than a Taylor Swift worldwide tour. What is going on?
It really has gone on a long time. And it's sort of flared up several times. Obviously, we've talked about it a bit before in terms of the fact that Keir Starmer got a lot of heat for the fact that he took free tickets to go and see Taylor Swift's...
10 free tickets.
Yep, with his family. He went twice during... Taylor Swift did 2 stops in London, one in June and one in August in her very, very long Eras tour. So Keir Starmer sort of eventually said he would pay those tickets back, which is now done. But then it's flared up again because there's been this big row about her security and whether the government was involved, whether she should have had this level of VIP security where basically she got a sort of blue light escort to Wembley. VVIP, which is only for normally only for royalty and like very senior politicians. And so there was a huge row about it. Some people are very, very angry about it. I don't know where you sit on it. I'm sort of fairly relaxed about the VVIP security. I don't know. I mean...
I can't say it keeps me awake at night, but I do think there is... Well, I think there's an issue because I think that there seems to be concern in the police that it sets a precedent because, you know, the next big pop star who comes over, do they have to do the same for them? It's a really costly, huge thing to do. As you say, it's only top politicians and I think actually even senior royalty. It's not even the lower ranks of royalty. So, you know... she's probably done better than Princess Beatrice for, you know.
Prince Harry.
Prince Harry, yeah, definitely. So I think it sets a bit of a precedent. I mean, you know, it's up to the police. It's not. I don't really get too fussed about that. But obviously, it's the bigger issue is was there any interference from? That's the kind of the murky thing that hangs over this war. You know, Sadiq Khan, Yvette Cooper, Keir Starmer all took these freebie tickets. She wasn't given a VVIP escort, then she was. Now, obviously, we know there was a threatened terror attack in the intervening period in Europe. So you can see there is a change in security there. But actually, we've not really been given clear answers from the government as to what kind of discussions they had with the Met. They just said the Met is operationally independent, but they've had discussions. And I think those two things don't really reconcile because the only point in having discussions is if you want to influence what decisions are made.
I think that, you know, I think from the reporting and the questions that we've been asking about this week, it's pretty clear that no one in government is denying that discussions took place.
Yeah.
That, you know, Sadiq Khan, as Mayor of London, the Home Secretary were involved in conversations about this. But they all say repeatedly that the Met are operationally independent. It's their decision. The Met asked for advice from the Attorney General because I think they initially wanted to refuse the request, and they wanted to understand what the kind of implications were if they granted this kind of protection. So it's a bit unclear, I think, where the line is around what influence, because you can see the argument that it would make sense for them to be in those conversations. You know, full disclosure, I went to the August 15th date of the Eras tour. I paid for it myself.
For your own ticket.
Paid for it myself and for my sister, who had not paid me back. So, you know, I'm sort of feeling a bit...
Shade.
Yeah, I know. I'm feeling pretty hard done by that everyone else got all these expensively free tickets. But I went, you know, privately with my friends, had a great time. But the date we went was the first of her August dates, and it was just after a foiled terror plot had forced her to cancel her dates in Vienna. And I remember going, and I wasn't particularly worried about it, but my sister and several of my friends said, you know, do you think we should cancel? Should we not go because of what happened in Austria? And I said, no, because I know that the security services and the police will be taking this really seriously. I know that they'll want this to go ahead. And so I felt reassured and comforted that there were conversations going on about it. And I'm glad that they did take that seriously. But not only from my own personal safety, but because there was, you know, half the crowd are like 10-year-old girls.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
And so I think there's that element that we do need to remember, and also that the fact that those shows contributed so much to the economy. I mean, I think the average person spent like £860 on tickets, accommodation, food, drink, whatever, merchandise. And so it was a big thing. And you can see that they didn't want to lose it. Like, you imagine the counterfactual.
It would have been terrible to have been cancelled.
Nasty
really
labour ruins, you know, all of that by
Oh,
stingy refusing to give her the security. And she doesn't need the money. Like, she could have just pulled those dates. She'd already been to London. She could have done it. So I think that is an important part of the context of it. What's tricky is it's got pulled into the kind of slightly murkier freebies stuff, and the fact that we then found out this week that the PM met her with his family on August 20th, I think, the final night of the tour. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but they were sort of a bit cagey about it. It took them ages to kind of cop to it. And then when they did, they said, Number 10 sort of suggested that they'd only talked about the Southport murders, which was obviously the tragic deaths of 3 girls in Southport who were at a Taylor Swift themed dance class. And I'm sure they did talk about that and not her security. But I also just thought that can't be totally true. He was with his children. Yeah. Like, why? I just feel like the communication has been poor.
I think that's it. The ins and outs of whether she deserved an escort, I kind of, in many ways, I think not many people are going to get too vexed about it. And I think you're right. The economic hit would have been terrible. All those young girls who were desperate to go and see it would have been incredibly disappointing. But I think that they just handle it so badly. And this is the bigger picture here. They have handled this so badly. Why not get on the front foot? It's always bits of information are dragged out, which allows this story to continue for days and days on end. 7 days of Taylor Swift stories. It's insane. And I don't understand why they can't kind of just get on the front foot with this. And then when you look back over the whole Freebie Gate issue, they've been inconsistent all the way along. So, for example, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, he said that taking tickets to big events like this are not a perk of the job. They are part of the job. Now, actually, if you take 10 tickets to Taylor Swift over 3 concerts, which, as the Prime Minister did, but he only attended 2, I think. So actually those tickets were essentially really for his family. Now, I don't think under any kind of analysis, it can be said that his family going to see Taylor Swift is part of the job. So why pretend it's part of the job when it's not a perk of the job, when actually that wasn't the Keir Starmer's words, it was his business secretary. But why was his business secretary sent out there to say that. And all the way along, they've been inconsistent about why people take freebies, whether it's right or not. The Prime Minister's paid back some tickets, not others. He's changing the rules, which is in itself an admission that he thinks it's now wrong, but he didn't think it was wrong at the time. They had to be
dragged to the point where they said that they weren't going to accept free clothes, money for clothes anymore, which again was probably the worst bit of all of this.
From day one, they have been they've changed their tack on the justification for these things. They then decided to pay bits of money back. They've decided to change the rules. They've just changed their the story on it repeatedly, which is really confusing. It allows the story to continue on and on and on and on. And I think there is a real problem with the way they communicate these issues.
And I think perception is everything.
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't really matter that a lot of this stuff, there's no rule breaking here. It just matters how the public sees it.
Yeah.
And I think that there has been a slowness to recognise that the public do feel, broadly seem to feel quite queasy about some of these things. And on what you were saying about the business secretary, I think people have different views on freebies. I'm quite po-faced about it. I think MPs shouldn't be taking so many personally, but that's not a view that everyone shares. Some of them are relevant to their work, and if you're the culture secretary or something like that, of course, there are things that you have to go to. I think the thing that Jonathan Reynolds is saying without saying is that what's probably really happening here is Keir Starmer was desperately worried about the impact of going into Downing Street on his kids. He talked about it quite a lot during the election campaign. And clearly some of these things, going to the football with his son, taking his daughter to see Taylor Swift, to meet Taylor Swift, are part of maybe trying to ease the transition for his children into Downing Street. But they don't want to say that, I think, because they don't want to talk about his family. And I think that's fair enough. But, I don't think that's necessarily part of the job.
He's chosen this life.
Of course. And no one asks you to be Prime Minister. But I think that's part of the motivation here.
I think I do get that, but I think Keir Starmer has tried to have it both ways with his children. He has said that he doesn't want them to be named, he doesn't want them to be in the public, but then when it turns out there's a free flat being used, then he says, well, it's for his son's GCSEs. Well, most people in the country, if they've got noisy neighbours or family problems, have to get on with it. They don't go and up sticks and live in a fancy flat. And then, the justification for these tickets, then it turns out to be about his family. You can't have it both ways. The one thing Boris Johnson was absolutely consistent on was that he never, ever, ever referred to or used his children in any way.
Or talked about his family
at all.
No matter what was
being said. It didn't
matter.
And it didn't matter if actually there was a good justification. You just never, ever went there. And I think you can't kind of dip your toe in that pool, say, no, the children are off limits. Oh, actually, well, we took this flat for the children. Oh, we took these tickets for the children. I think that's quite a tricky argument to make.
Yeah, and I think also more broadly, on this stuff, I think the public, certainly journalists, are sort of addicted to this sort of sugar rush of political scandal that we've had over the past few years. And the danger in this moment is that scandals of varying levels of severity are all being conflated, and it all looks like it's this big mess around freebies and, VIP security and all of that, when actually quite a lot of it is sort of totally fine.
Yeah.
But when it gets into this big mess, it looks worse than it is, and that is a communication issue, and that's something they need to get a grip on.
Definitely.
So, Sam, moment of the week?
Well, we're well over the 100-day mark now, but Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions still keeps calling Rishi Sunak Prime Minister. It's a bit like calling your new partner by your ex's name or calling the teacher at school mum. I think he's going to have to kind of sort this one out. Lizzy, what about you?
Mine is less fun, but I think the introduction of a private member's bill to change law on assisted dying yesterday is just quite a moment, regardless of whether you're pro or anti it, and there's a lot of strong feelings on all sides. I think it's a moment. It hasn't been in Parliament, debated in Parliament for nearly 10 years, and I think it's just a moment of kind of really thinking about where we are as a society. So I think the next few weeks as we run up to the first debate on that will be really interesting.
It's going to be huge. Well, that's it for this week. Keep up to date with us on socials, and we'll be back next week.
Bye for now.